just clarify for the people that are listening that we're recording this on the morning that we announced that Foundry's 2022 fund, the fund that we just raised, will be our last fund. We're gonna wrap up, and I say just announced. I mean, truly, I think it was about an hour ago that I posted the post to the Foundry blog post, and then I wrote something on my own as well. And that, as Barak, you just referenced, had always sort of been the design principle of Foundry. When we got together, when the four of us got together and started Foundry, we did a lot of work on sort of what type of platform we wanted to build, and that resulted in a series of decisions, some of which we've kind of played around with, and I'll talk about that in a second. But a bunch of decisions as we started, and those included things like we would do all the work ourselves, right? We really never seriously experimented with having associates or analysts or other people that sort of other firms have, right? We wanted to stay small and stay focused. We decided we wanted to raise, when we were doing the early stage practice, the same fund every time. And so our first fund was $225 million. And then our second fund and our third fund and our fourth fund, they were all $225 million. It was only when we added on the fund of funds that we actually grew the size of the funds that we raised. So just things like that. And one of those things we talked about was it's really hard to transition ownership in a venture firm. You really have to be incredibly intentional about doing it. And for the four of us, even back then, right? I mean, it's funny to talk about it now, but I mean, the truth is we were, I was probably 33 at the time, talking about like, well, we don't want to have a generational firm. I mean, it all seems so far in the distance, right? This is nearly 20 years ago now, 18 years ago. But we felt like that was sort of part of what we were trying to build. We wanted to focus on the business of venture and not the business of firm building, right? So when you think about a lot of those decisions, they're related: not raising larger funds, not having analysts and associates, and not creating a generational firm are all kind of the same thing, which was our saying, no, we really want to focus solely on the work of investing. And so that's what we did. Now, in truth, we did experiment a little bit with the idea of creating a generational firm, right? We have brought on a couple of new partners, specifically Lyndall, who runs our fund of funds practice, and then also Chris Moody and Jacqueline Hester. And we did experiment, or at least have discussions in the last couple years about, well, what would it look like if we handed the reins over to Lyndall and Jacqueline and let them continue on with that. And I think we were quite open with that. Ultimately, it was actually their decision, right? They felt like, no, the Foundry platform and the Foundry ethos is so tied to the four founders of Foundry, and three of us are still there. My partner, Jason, retired a couple years ago. That, I think that they ultimately came to the conclusion, which we very much supported because it was kind of back to first principles, that we should stick with the original plan and ultimately wrap up. So, I think it means different things to each of us, right? I mean, I think, when I look across our partnership, I think we're all very focused for a while on the business of continuing to invest. We have several years. We're announcing early, right? We didn't want people to have the perception that we somehow couldn't raise or something bad had happened or something like that. And so we thought, well, once we've made the decision, we should probably announce it, and let's announce it sort of mid-cycle, right? We've got 2 years. We raised the fund in 2022. We had our last close about a year ago. So, we're really like in the heart of the investment cycle. We have at least 2 years left on the to invest in new companies. And so we felt like this was a good time to kind of make that announcement. And that gives us plenty of time to kind of plan for what's next, right? I mean, we have another probably 15 years of managing Foundry. Hopefully not all of that ends up being full-time, but certainly I, for one, have raised my hand within Foundry and said, I will be here until the absolute end. And I have a lot of, I've been in venture for a long time. I like to think of myself as not like super old, right? I mean, I've just hit my early 50s. And so I've got a lot of energy and interest. But I also have a lot of energy and interest in other things. And I think it's kind of apropos that that you and I are talking, right? Because one of the things that ultimately I want to create a little bit more time for are some of the other work that I do around venture, supporting venture platforms around the world. And so, as you know, that was the thing that drove me to working with you and Startup Istanbul, and that's important to me. But I do that in other markets as well, and I'm working on some things in the Middle East. I advising on the LPAC of a couple funds in markets in Africa, and so there's some other things I'd love to over time have some more time to do. And some of that, by the way, will probably include continuing some relationship with venture firms in the U.S. I've been kind of toying around with what that might look like as well. But one of the funny things, I wrote this in my blog post about venture, is you make an announcement like this, and then I go back to my schedule. Right, I've got a full schedule of things. Today I'm in New York all next week with portfolio companies and meetings, and there's no like pack your banker's box, have your party, your go away party, and then you wake up the next morning and you don't have anything to do. We have years and years and years of full-time work ahead of us at Foundry. So